Hi and welcome back to a new video. I bought this thing on eBay like several weeks ago. I found this in like Eastern Europe for about 40 euro, like excluding shipping. And that's a Silverstone Tundra. It's like a very old legacy case with apparently internal water cooling. I still have to do some research because like right now I don't even know if, from what exact year this is, but I guess at least like 15 years old. And yeah, I will have to make this compatible with AM4. So just have to check how the CPU cooling block looks like and then check if we can adapt this and build a nowadays system in there.
Seasonic, the heart of your system.
It kind of reminds me of a suitcase. But considering that it's from 2005 to 2006, that we're talking about a 15-year-old case, it's not even looking that bad. A bit of a suitcase style, but apart from that, I think it's quite okay. There's also a temperature gauge on front. I was first thinking like, why is this going to 140? But then I realized it's Fahrenheit and not degrees Celsius. So yeah. All right, time to open this thing. Okay, quick look on the back. At least we can spot some water cooling fittings, power connector probably for pump and fans or both, I don't know. And I guess that's inside this box. Looks a bit empty. Not sure which part is missing right here or if that's already sitting in the case. I don't even know if it was used or if this is new. I have no info on this whatsoever. Some mounting equipment for the CPU cooling block. It's like an external slot adapter thing. Not sure why you would have this with this case though. This seems to be our CPU cooling block. Power extension cord. Thermal paste. It's going to be interesting if this is... I mean, it should still be good if it's sealed, right? So, yeah. Wow. This thing still looks... It looks absolutely fantastic. Just look at the quality, like the shiny surfaces. Damn. This still looked great. Not even sure if I just ruined it by touching it, but I hope not. Maybe it's straight going to clean it. So apparently on this cooler, the plate will be mounted on the bottom. It's also quite elegant. I mean, thinking about that, it's like 15 years old. It's pretty nice. Well, Intel 775 was obvious, but so the other one was 754. And the center one was 939940 and AM2. I'm very impressed. This is like solid aluminum, and just look at the thickness of those acrylic plates. And what? Wait. So this is not without an external radiator. The case is the radiator. The water cooling is... it's included in the case itself. I first thought because we have like... so you can probably hook this up to like an external, or wait, is this just a water cooling unit without a PC? Did I just not realize what I actually bought? Is this just an external water cooling unit and it's not even a PC case? Right now I'm just extremely surprised. I mean, the eBay auction listed something like external PC water case. Yeah, it kind of is an external PC water case, but a case I considered that it would be like a PC case, not like just an external water radiator with pump. By the way, talking about pump, it looks like those are dual pumps. One on the left, like underneath here, one on the right, underneath here. So dual pump, that's also big overkill, I guess. And why do they have those foam things behind the pump? Is this like for noise dampening maybe? It's maybe the same as what you can see right here. Could also be for noise dampening, but it also kind of doesn't make any sense. So if this is like a passive cooling radiator, for example, then I mean you would have all the surface right here, like all on the outside, but then there's 50% of the surface is inside, right? And if you're going to close this, I don't expect that there will be any kind of ventilation through those tiny holes. Why did they not make like proper cutouts for ventilation through this thing? I don't get it. This is by far the weirdest water cooling part I have ever seen. And here we can see our new mounting plate for the CPU cooling block. We will remove the part in the center for the CPU block itself, and here we have our AM4 mounting holes. It's also the perfect opportunity to just reuse some of our like aluminium waste materials, because we have to thin this a little bit out and then, yep. Looks pretty awesome. Just have to deburr some of the edges and remove the center part, and then we're good to go. As you know, my original plan was that we were building pretty much a mini ITX PC inside a water-cooled case, which didn't work out as planned. I still have the components right here, so it's an ASUS ROG B550i gaming board. Quite interesting board actually. If you pay more attention to the VRM cooler, you can see there's a tiny fan sitting inside. So even though it's just tiny space, I guess you can still use this, especially also if you want to run a water cooling unit, then there should still be some airflow, probably not that much. We will check out what the temperatures will look like, but that was my original plan. We will still stick to the plan because I also at the same time wanted to test this CPU, the 5700G. I'm pretty sure that you're all familiar with this CPU. It's a simple 8-core AMD CPU. 2D performance wise, it's pretty much on par with the 3700X, which is nowadays still a very strong CPU. But it comes with Vega iGPU, so a strong iGPU. And depending on your plans for the future, like upgrade plans, one idea you could have is, I mean, either you're just building a mini ITX PC with a tiny case where you cannot use any kind of graphics card. Then you can just stick to this, should be the strongest APU on the market. But you could also come up with the idea of using this as like an upgrade path. So you're just using this for like a temporary solution. Use this with the internal graphics. And whenever your dedicated graphics card will be available or cheaper, like a 3080 Ti, for example, you could still plug it in there and just use the CPU which is sitting inside. And as I said before, the just CPU cores internally are pretty much on a level of a 3700X, which is quite performance. As I said before, the performance is pretty much on the level of a 3700X, which is still absolutely okay for gaming nowadays, but it is obviously more expensive than if you would straight go for a 3700X. So that is kind of the trade-off here. We'll assemble everything, and then, by the way, if you were thinking about getting this board with this CPU and then thinking, hey, with a 5700G there is this boxed cooler included, and I'm just going to use that for my tiny system, that is not going to work out. Cooler collides on the left, and also collides on the right, which is the reason. First I thought, hey, it might only collide here, so I'm just going to rotate this by 90 degrees, but it's, I mean, then this round part will just be here and still collide with the memory, so that's not going to work out. And the second thing I noticed about the motherboard is that, I mean, they're calling this M.2 heatsink, which is just, it's just a piece of metal, right? It would have been cool if they just added some fins right here, could have increased the surface area of this block here by like 3 or 4 times. And definitely improved temperatures of the SSD, so that's something I would have liked to see on the board. So now I just have to figure out how to mount this with our new plate on the bottom. It looks very, very shiny. And I actually hope to just use the original screws from those mounting brackets. They're, yeah, a bit longer than like usually, but this should be just enough to have like 1 or 2 rows of the threads, yeah, to carry the screw. Let's see if that works out. I was just thinking about replacing those original fittings because those are for the rather tiny tube, 8 to 6 tube. So it should be 8mm outer diameter and 6mm inner diameter. And yeah, so I just removed this from the cooler and figured out that this is not following any kind of standards. So it's like a reversed thing. So if you would like to replace this with a normal EK fitting, for example, you have the O-ring sitting pretty much inside the fitting. But here the O-ring was sitting like just inside here, which means we have to put this back in and just stick for tiny tubing. I'm not sure how much of an external water cooling this will be or would have been, because those are 4 pieces of like 40 centimeter, maybe 50 centimeter at best tube length. It's not going to be that external. Oh well, should be okay for our case. Finally, also completely understood how this cooling concept is meant to be. So first of all, we have our pump reservoir combination with dual pump. And I'm not sure, or I was not sure if this was meant to be like if one pump fails, then you still have a second one, but that's absolutely not the case. You can see there is this, it's like a connector for both pumps, and this will go directly to the cooler. So both outputs of the pumps combined will go to the CPU cooling block, which also means that if one pump fails, it will just pump in a circle. That's not that ideal. So I hope that both pumps are still alive, but I think this thing has never been used from the condition. So I'm pretty confident that everything will still be fine. So it will exit right here, come back from the cooler, from the center, go in the bottom cooling loop, come out here, go to the middle cooling loop, come out here, go to the top cooling loop, come out here, and goes all the way right back to the reservoir. Now that will be interesting. It's working, but it kind of sounds like there's some air trapped inside the pumps. Yeah, you can see that. Also, I mean, we can kind of see the water flow a bit if we just try to take a look inside, but considering that it's dual pump, it's not that much yet. I think I'm just going to power it on and off a few times. You can see the water jet coming out is not that strong. Now just have to flash the BIOS, I guess, because at least it's not booting, and even with a different memory kit it's still not booting. So I guess it could be because it's the new APU that a BIOS update is required, and BIOS flashback is always a great feature to use if you have trouble with that. I've been running this system for about 1 hour in 3D Mark times by extreme loop test just to put some heat inside the system. You can see I also put the cover on, which definitely helped like fighting the noise of those dual pumps, but I can still absolutely and definitely hear them, and it's also on a level where for an HD PC, and that should have been the use case of this case literally, I think that's not really acceptable. The pumps are way too loud. But we have this nice display in front, also with lights built in, should indicate that the temperature is about maybe like 38 to closing into 40 degrees Celsius, which is also on par. I mean, I can feel it, feels nice and warm, but it's definitely possible to cool this system with this massive external water cooling. It's even 2 hours the test has been running, and the peak package power was just below 90 watt. And that's also the reason why the CPU stays fairly cold. Peak temperature on the CPU core was 73 degrees Celsius. That is a lot of headroom, and even now during the test you can see that the CPU temperature with 60 degrees Celsius, it's not really that warm, but I mean, it's not running smooth. It's also not the greatest performer, at least the APU, but that was also kind of expected, but the low TDP explains why. The CPU efficiency-wise is great, but for 3D loads, it's not such a high performance. The iGPU peaked out at 60 degrees Celsius. Running some heavy 2D load like R20, it's getting into the region of 80 degrees Celsius. I mean, there's still some headroom, but considering it's a 65 watt TDP CPU, it's not the greatest temperature ever, but the score 5300 points, that is below a 11700K, but a bit above a 3700X, maybe like 100 points above a 3700X. The first gaming benchmark, if we run Remnant from the ASUS in 1080p with medium settings, it's not enjoyable to play. It's somewhere in the region of 30 to 35 FPS, which is, I guess, technically okay, but it's something you're not going to enjoy. For Remnant from the ASUS, I would absolutely recommend to tune the settings down to low. It will improve your gaming experience overall. It won't look as nice, but it's much more enjoyable now with about 72 FPS average and about 54 FPS in 1% low. Second comparison will be Pubg. Yeah, 1080p, very low settings, it's not enjoyable. It's playable, but you're not going to enjoy it. It's just somewhere between 40 and 50 FPS on average. Currently 46 FPS and 1% low is below 40. That's definitely in a region where you can feel that it's not going to be smooth. But at least our cooling works fine. If you check the yellow bar, it's about 50 degrees Celsius. That's nice. We will now compare the results to this 1050 Ti, and that's the card I've been using for over 4 years for all my 2D stuff. It's also quite sad that I bought this card over 4 years ago for about 140, 150 euro, which is still exactly the same price today. Absolutely insane. If we now compare Pubg, the 1050 Ti versus Vega 8 IGP, it's quite a big difference. It's about 20 FPS in average and also 20 FPS in 1% low. It's a very solid increase using the 1050 Ti over the iGPU of the 5700G. Very similar result in Remnant from the ASUS. It's again 1080p, very low. Average about 130. That's almost double than using the Vega 8. And 1% low is hitting the 100 FPS mark, where previously we had 57 FPS. And for the 1050 Ti, even if we switch to medium settings, which was absolutely not playable with the Vega 8, it's playable with the 1080 Ti. Hitting about 60 FPS in average almost, and almost 40 FPS in 1% low. Time to draw a conclusion. Pretty much, I mean, we have two products, but we're only going to draw 1.5 conclusions, because for the Silverstone Tundra TD01, it's not really necessary to draw a conclusion, because we knew like right from the start that this is a product that doesn't really make much sense, at least when we figured out that this is supposed to be an external water cooling loop. And obviously you cannot find anything like this anymore today. And I guess for a good reason, because it's massive. It's absolutely massive. It takes up a lot of space. The cooling performance is okay to use with such a CPU with a very low power consumption. But that's it. There's not really anything positive why I would ever use this. Especially, I'm going to take off my microphone. Let's open this up. Yeah, I hope you could hear it, because I now also understand why there is this like foam, insulation foam inside in the top. That should help, or is supposed to help to dampen the noise a little bit. It's helping, but I guess it's also the reason because there are not many holes in the top part. That definitely helps in the noise level, like reduction of the noise. But it's still way too loud with a dual pump solution. Also, if this is supposed to be like an HDPC cooling unit, why are you going to use dual pumps? Dual pumps is such an overkill performance-wise. And performance, I mean, it's just a passive cooler. And 50% of it is not really exposed, because 50% of the surface area is laying inside of our case. And with those tiny holes, you will not have a lot of ventilation. So 50% of your performance is pretty much gone. So that's not really, there is no real reason why you would go for dual pumps. And dual pumps in this configuration also means dual risk, because if one pump fails, the other will just pump in a circle. So that's not ideal. It's definitely not ideal, and that's also 100% the reason why this was never a success. I found some images from like older exhibitions and stuff where I checked what was the general idea of this, like how was it supposed to be used. And it was just sitting on a desk, like on a big desk, next to another PC with a similar form factor than this, maybe a little bit bigger. But if you would utilize this space in a good way, you could easily have like a 360 active radiator with this spacing with a pump inside and have fans running at a very, very low RPM where you're not going to hear it, where the fans are going to be much more quiet than the pumps, and your performance will be a lot better. The performance was okay for a 65 watt TDP CPU, but that's it. There's like, it would have been a way smarter solution to just use a passive cooler on the CPU. Costs half. This was supposed to be about $200. And there are very good passive coolers for about €100, right? Or $100. So yeah. And a passive cooler is not going to fail. So that would have been, I guess, the better choice. Otherwise, it was very interesting, and I guess that's about it. For the 5700G CPU, I also have a bit mixed feelings about this CPU. I know there have been a lot of like positive reviews out there because it's like the strongest APU you can buy. But then it's also, at least in Germany, it's about €350, which I think, considering the 3D performance, this is just way too much. If you are going to, or if you want to build a gaming PC and you are very low on budget, I would absolutely avoid this CPU. Just get like a 3600, for example, or even cheaper on the CPU, and get like a 1650 or any other low budget GPU. This will give you much higher performance than this. So performance to price wise, 3D is not ideal. It's like far from ideal. The only reason why I see, or the only reason I can think of buying the 5700G is if you are not able to use any kind of GPU. If you are very limited in space, for example, or there was a reason why you couldn't use a GPU, any other reason, then the 5700G might be an option because it's the strongest APU. But apart from that, just save costs on the CPU, put more of your money and budget into the GPU, you will have a much better gaming performance. All right, was still quite entertaining to test this. Sometimes they made such obscure stuff in the past. Thanks for tuning in, see you next time, bye.